Welcome back to the deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a big meeting, taking a long walk, or just, sitting back because you are insanely curious about how things are built, we are thrilled you're joining us today.
We really are.
And normally, we spend our time unpacking massive, sprawling subjects. We take stacks of dense research papers, complex economic theories, historical analyses, and we try to distill them down into something digestible for you.
Right. Usually it's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, exactly. But today, we're doing something entirely different. We are looking at something incredibly small, a microtext, really. And to really match the vibe of the text we're looking at, we're going for a very calm voice today.
Oh, absolutely. A highly stable, clear delivery.
Right, maybe keeping the speed at about, say, 85% of our usual pace, just to really slow down and analyze the clarity of it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's a noticeable shift for us, for sure. Today's source material is drawn from a document simply titled muji2.txt, which translates to script 2. And we're focusing our entire analysis on one specific, highly structured, minimalist segment from that document. It's called 2 Coffee Break. And it's essentially a self-contained language learning module.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I first looked at this source, my immediate reaction was to wonder how we were going to spend any real time on it. I mean, it's roughly 70 words long in total.
It is incredibly brief.
Right. It's a script designed to teach English, led by a figure who introduces himself as Jack from the DFY Channel. But when you actually sit down and interrogate what Jack is doing in these few lines, you realize it's an incredibly deliberate piece of architecture. Every single word, every repetition, and crucially, every omission has a specific cognitive purpose.
Yeah, the overarching goal of the material is highly functional. It's built to guide a language student through a very simple narrative. But as we take a granular look at this today, we're going to see exactly how language, repetition, and sensory anchors are deployed, not just to communicate a short story, but to systematically wire a brain for a new language.
It's fascinating.
It really is a highly efficient piece of instructional design.
And the subject matter itself is universally relatable. It's just about taking a coffee break. Something you, our listener, have probably done thousands of times without giving it a second thought. But we're going to look at the specific anatomy of that break through the lens of this teaching script.
Let's get into it.
Let's jump right into the text itself. We start with the introduction of the source. The script opens with a very clear, direct greeting from the host. It says, and I'm quoting here, "Hello everyone, this is Jack from the DFY Channel. Today's topic is coffee break."
It's completely devoid of any conversational preamble.
Yeah, no fluff at all.
Zero. And from an analytical perspective, that directness is doing a lot of the heavy lifting right out of the gate. When someone is trying to acquire a new language, ambiguity is their biggest enemy.
Oh, for sure.
Ambiguity spikes anxiety, which in turn raises what linguists call the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Right. Exactly. It's basically a mental block that prevents learning when you're stressed. So Jack immediately establishes a highly controlled pedagogical environment to keep that filter down.
Right. He's building a safe container. He tells the learner exactly who is speaking, where they are, the DFY channel, and establishes the absolute boundaries of the lesson. Today's topic is coffee break. There's no mystery about where the conversation might wander. If you're a learner feeling overwhelmed by English, Jack is essentially handing you a map before the journey even starts.
He's setting a baseline of predictability. You know exactly what domain of vocabulary to activate in your brain before he even begins the story. And then he transitions immediately into the core narrative.
Yeah. The script labels this next part the short story section. I'm going to read the entire core narrative for you, exactly as it appears in the text. Here it is. "I feel a little tired. I make a cup of coffee. I sit by the window. I drink slowly. The coffee is warm. Now I feel better."
That's the entirety of the narrative.
Yeah.
6 sentences.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because on the surface, that's just a completely mundane sequence of events.
Very everyday.
But if you look at the mechanics, the stark minimalism of those sentences is doing something highly strategic. It almost reads like a brutalist poem. Every sentence is stripped down to its absolute chassis: subject, verb, object. There's zero narrative fluff.
And yet, within that strict minimalism, there's a complete psychologically satisfying character arc. Think about the journey the narrator takes here. They start in a state of deficit, a state of fatigue. I feel a little tired.
Right.
From there, we move immediately into physical action to address that deficit. I make a cup of coffee, I sit by the window, I drink slowly. Then the narrative suddenly pauses the forward momentum to drop in a single vital sensory detail.
The coffee is warm.
Exactly, the coffee is warm. And finally, it resolves in a state of restoration. Now I feel better. It's a highly symmetrical progression. Problem, action, sensation, and resolution.
I love how you phrased that, pausing the forward momentum for a sensory detail. It makes me want to ask you, the listener, right now, what stands out to you when you hear those stripped-down elemental actions? I sit by the window. I drink slowly.
It's very evocative.
It is. For me, the syntax perfectly mirrors the psychological state of taking a break. The sentence structure itself forces the reader to slow down. The heavy use of periods creates a rhythm of forced pauses.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate use of the present tense and the active voice to enforce that pacing. Jack isn't telling a retrospective story. He's not saying, yesterday I made coffee because I was tired.
Hey, it's not a memory.
No, he says, I make a cup of coffee. By keeping everything in the immediate present and utilizing the first-person I, the script places the learner directly inside the action. The learner isn't passively translating a story about some abstract third party. They're actively living the experience in real time.
Which fundamentally changes the relationship to the vocabulary. It's the difference between watching someone else drink coffee through a screen and holding the mug yourself. The language demands that you embody the action.
Exactly.
And I want to circle back to that line. The coffee is warm. It's the only sentence in the entire block that steps away from the I doing a physical action. It shifts the focus entirely onto an external object and a physical sensation.
That shift is a crucial anchor. It connects cognitive language acquisition directly with sensory memory. If you're learning the word warm, tying it to the universally understood, tactile experience of holding a fresh cup of coffee makes that vocabulary deeply sticky.
Sticky, that's a great word for it.
It's no longer just a string of letters to memorize. It's a feeling you can instantly recall.
But Jack doesn't just leave the learner with that sensory memory. Once he's established this core narrative, the architecture of the lesson shifts gears. The script moves into a section titled, Repeat After Me.
This is where it gets really tactical.
Yeah, and this is where we see the text actively being manipulated for a different cognitive goal. Jack doesn't just have the learner repeat the exact story we just analyzed. He provides a specific variation. Here's what the script provides for the speaking drill. I make a cup of coffee, I sit by the window, I drink slowly, now I feel better.
The alterations there are highly intentional.
Completely. When I first read that, I noticed two crucial lines from the original story are just gone. The opening emotional state, I feel a little tired, has vanished. And that sensory anchor we were just discussing, the coffee is warm, is also scrubbed from the text.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain processes new information, this is a highly effective strategy for managing cognitive load.
How so?
Well, in a repeat after me drill, the demands on the student are immense. They have to hear the auditory cue, process the pronunciation, physically coordinate their vocal cords and mouth to mimic those unfamiliar sounds, and simultaneously retain the semantic meaning of what they're saying.
Right, which is exhausting for a beginner.
Immensely exhausting. Usually when we tell stories, we want more sensory detail to make things memorable. But here, the goal isn't storytelling. By making it purely mechanical make, sit, drink, he's deliberately lowering that cognitive load.
I see.
The learner can just focus entirely on the muscle memory of the pronunciation without having to juggle the emotional context or the descriptive adjectives.
Precisely. By stripping away the deficit state and the sensory detail, the script isolates the core physical actions and the final resolution. It forces the learner to focus purely on executing the most essential active verbs. Make, sit, drink, feel. I make a cup of coffee, I sit by the window, I drink slowly, now I feel better.
It establishes a rhythm of pure, unadulterated action.
Yeah. The learner isn't bogged down trying to remember how to pronounce warm or express the nuance of being a little tired. They're drilling the physical mechanics of the routine.
It's like removing the drywall to expose the load-bearing studs of a house.
Oh, I like that analogy.
The verbs are the load-bearing studs of English syntax. You absolutely have to know how to make, sit, drink, and feel before you can start hanging decorations on those walls-like feelings and temperatures. Curating the text this way for the speaking drill focuses the learner's energy exactly where it yields the highest return on investment.
And it also engineers a sense of immediate success. By the time the learner successfully vocalizes those 4 sentences, they've articulated a complete active process that ends in a positive resolution. Now I feel better. The linguistic structure itself provides positive psychological reinforcement.
The grammar is literally rewarding them.
I find that fascinating. Okay, so we've had the short story, which sets the scene and builds the sensory world. We've had the repeat after me drill, which strips the world away to focus purely on actionable verbs. But the lesson isn't over.
Right. There's a third phase.
The script moves into a section titled Listening Again, and it changes the text yet again. Here's the final variation from the source material. I feel tired. I make coffee. I sit by the window. I drink slowly. Now I feel better.
The shifts here are much more subtle than the previous section.
Yeah.
But they represent another distinct pedagogical tool.
Right. So looking closely at the differences between this listening version and the original story. In the original, the narrator says, I feel a little tired. Here, it's just, I feel tired. Originally, it was, I make a cup of coffee. Now it's simply, I make coffee. The sensory line, the coffee is warm, is still missing, but the opening state of fatigue is back, just in a heavily truncated form.
This raises an important question.
Bro.
Why manipulate the text a third time? Why not just return to the original narrative for the final listening exercise, since they've already practiced the vocabulary?
I would argue it's a targeted comprehension check. Notice how Jack strips out the qualitative descriptors here. By dropping a little and a cup of, he's forcing the learner's brain to stop translating degrees of feeling or units of measurement. It forces them to process purely raw operational syntax.
That's a great read on it. It's about simplifying complexity to verify ultimate understanding. When a learner listens to this hyper-simplified version, subject, verb, adjective for I feel tired, and subject, verb, noun for I made coffee, their auditory processing isn't distracted by modifiers.
They aren't getting lost in the weeds.
Exactly. If the learner can fluidly track this absolute base level of the narrative, they've internalized the fundamental mechanics of the language being taught.
It's almost like a photographic focus pulling technique. First, Jack gives you the wide shot in the short story. You see the fatigue, the cup, the window, the warmth. Then, in the speaking drill, he pulls the focus incredibly tight onto just the necessary actions.
Yeah.
And finally, in this listening exercise, he pulls the focus back just enough to show you the major landmarks of the narrative without any of the background blur. Fatigue, coffee, window, better.
And if you listen to the cadence, the rhythm actually changes when those descriptors are removed. I feel tired, I make coffee. It becomes noticeably punchier, far more direct.
It does sound punchier.
For a non-native ear trying to parse the language, the individual syllables are much easier to catch and separate. It effectively solidifies the vocabulary in their working memory one last time before the module concludes.
It's an incredibly elegant way to close out the instructional portion. And that brings us to the final section of the source text, the ending section. After guiding the student through this story, deconstructing it, and reassembling it, Jack signs off. The script reads, "Nice listening today. Keep learning English. See you next time."
It serves as a structural bookend to that very direct introduction we discussed earlier.
So what does this all mean? When I analyze those final 3 sentences, the tone strikes me as highly intentional. Nice listening today validates the intense cognitive effort the learner just expended.
It's pure positive reinforcement.
Right, but the phrase, keep learning English, see you next time, is what really stands out to me. It frames language acquisition not as a grueling, high-stakes academic test that you pass or fail, but as a continuous, low-pressure journey. There's no final exam administered here, just a gentle, open-ended invitation to return.
It perfectly manages the emotional state of the learner. Think back to the narrative arc we talked about.
Yeah.
We started with the narrator feeling tired and ended up feeling better after the routine of the coffee.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Jack is actively mirroring that exact psychological journey for the student. A student often starts a language lesson feeling fatigued or intimidated by the cognitive hurdle. Jack ensures they end the lesson feeling accomplished, validated, and invited back. The architecture of the lesson delivers the exact same psychological relief as the coffee break it's describing.
That structural parallel really changes how you look at something so seemingly insignificant. I mean, we've spent all this time digging into a handful of sentences, and there's an entire philosophy of adult education packed into them.
If we synthesize the key takeaways from the entire text, what becomes clear is that Jack, from the DFY channel, uses a basic coffee break as much more than just a thematic vehicle for vocabulary. It's a carefully layered tool for cognitive conditioning. He introduces the learner to a descriptive story to build context and sensory anchors. He seamlessly shifts them into an action-oriented drill by stripping away everything but the core verbs to reduce cognitive load. And finally, he brings them into a streamlined listening exercise that removes descriptors to solidify pure structural comprehension.
And he executes all of that without ever confusing the listener, simply by setting clear boundaries and offering consistent validation along the way. It's a powerful reminder that effective communication, and especially effective teaching, isn't always about giving someone more information.
Often it's the exact opposite.
Right. Often it's about giving them significantly less, but structuring that limitation with absolute precision.
Which brings us to a rather profound parallel, a final thought for you to consider as we wrap up our analysis today. We spent this time dissecting how deliberate, structured repetition and the removal of excess information is used here to build a foundation for learning a complex new skill. Jack strips the narrative down, repeats it, removes the noise, and forces a focus on the core actions. Consider how that exact methodology mirrors the fundamental purpose of the coffee break itself.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. That's a really compelling connection.
Think about it. When you take a genuine break, you're intentionally stepping away from the overwhelming noise, the emails, and the complex variables of your workday. You're physically removing yourself to sit by a window. You're intentionally slowing down your pacing.
Yeah, you're curating your environment.
Exactly. You repeat a calming, highly familiar routine, the physical act of making the coffee, the tactile sensation of holding the warm mug. You are quite literally stripping your current reality down to its most basic comforting components in order to transition your brain from a state of fatigue to a state of restoration.
The process of the lesson and the process of the break are identical. The text doesn't just teach the vocabulary for the routine. The structure of the text is the routine. It removes the stressful modifiers of our day and leaves us with just the essential manageable verbs. Breathe, sit, drink.
Exactly. So as you move through the rest of your week, you might want to ask yourself, how might we apply this concept of radical simplification in our own lives?
That's a great question.
When we're feeling overwhelmed, scattered, or just a little tired, how can we strip our own routines down to their absolute, most basic actions to find a moment of clarity? How can we find our own version of Jack's minimalist syntax to help us filter out the noise and finally say, now I feel better?
Next time you make a cup of coffee or tea, or just take a minute to look out a window, pay attention to the specific mechanics of those simple actions. See if you can recognize the value in stripping away the excess, just like we found in this microtext today. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us into the hidden architecture of a coffee break. We hope you walk away feeling just a little bit better and a lot more curious about the invisible structures hiding in plain sight. Keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.